Welcome back to Zero to Hero. Today's topic is archetypes. What is an archetype? Well, in media as a whole, it's defined as a very typical example of a certain person or thing. In Pokemon, it's mostly used in the context of team compositions as a description for a team that fits a typical example of a specific game plan. An archetype at its core is the type of game plan that the team follows to win. So two teams can have 6 completely different Pokemon, but fall under the same archetype because they use similar tools and methods to win the game. So what is a game plan? A game plan is a strategy for achieving an objective. In this case, the objective is winning the battle, and the strategies used are accomplished by using Pokemon that, when put together, form an archetype or a team. So an archetype is a group of Pokemon that work well together in carrying out a specific strategy or game plan to win the battle. I've settled on 7 basic archetypes, all of which have sub-archetypes. Of course, there are more than just 7, but most archetypes you come across will fit within these 7 or as a subtype within them. Just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment of what your favorite archetype is. They are Weather, Hyper Offense, Trick Room, Balance, Bulky Offense, Setup, and Stall. A team can be considered to be a specific archetype when it shares the same game plan associated with that archetype. These, like most definitions in competitive Pokemon, are not hard and fast rules, but are used to get a quick idea of what a team does and what its game plan, strengths, and weaknesses are. Teams can often be a mix of 2 or 3 different archetypes, but we'll get into that in more detail in the next video about cores and modes. One last thing about archetypes before we get into them is that they tend to persist across formats and generations, so understanding how these archetypes work will help you for years to come. Okay, let's review the basic archetypes so you can be more prepared to play with or against them. First up is Weather. The game plan of a weather archetype is to use the effects from a specific weather condition to your advantage. A key part of this strategy is keeping control of the weather and getting the most you can out of it with your limited weather turns. Weather teams include at least one weather setter, either manual or automatic, Pokemon like Pelipper and Tyranitar for automatic, or Tornadus and Whimsicott for manual. They include at least 1, but usually 2 weather abusers. These are Pokemon that benefit from the damage boost provided by rain or sun, or Pokemon that have weather-specific abilities like Swift Swim, Chlorophyll, and Sand Rush, or abilities that increase damage like Solar Power and Sand Force. Pokemon with moves that gain weather-specific boosts like Hurricane, Blizzard, Electroshot, and Aura Veil can also fall under this category. Weather teams also include Pokemon with good type synergy for the specific weather, like Grass and Steel types in the rain essentially have their fire weakness removed, or how Rock, Steel, and Ground types in the sand don't take chip damage, not to mention Rock type's 50% special defense boost. Abilities fit in here too with things like Dry Skin or Harvest that don't really increase your offensive potential, but still synergize well with the weather. Subtypes of the weather archetype include each main weather condition of rain, sun, sand, and snow. The 3 damage boosting terrains could fit here, but since terrains are less impactful overall compared to weather, they don't really constitute an archetype of their own. The only one I think that could potentially fit here is Psy Spam, but that really fits better under Hyper Offense or Trick Room archetypes. But if you wanted to argue a case that it fits here, I wouldn't disagree with you. The strengths of using weather teams are, at the end of the day, just getting a whole bunch of stat boosts for free. Increasing damage with rain and sun is like getting an attack boost, while sand and snow straight up give defensive boosts to their respective types. The speed enhancing abilities are also really just raw stat boosts, with speed being doubled in this specific weather condition. With an automatic weather setter, you get all these stat boosts for simply switching in. The weakness of weather teams is that they are often reliant on the weather condition. If the weather is lost, or replaced by a different weather condition, not only do you lose all these boosts, but you potentially have reduced stats. For example, water moves in the rain go from boosted to not just neutral, but reduced if the rain is replaced with sun. So if you can stall out the weather or replace it, these teams will really struggle. Next up is Hyper Offense. The game plan of Hyper Offense teams is to hit fast and hit hard. They try to take one-hit KOs as frequently as possible and break through opponents' defenses with immense damage. Sometimes they take advantage of tight matchups, other times they simply do so much damage that weaknesses and resistances hardly matter. In addition to hitting hard, they also need to move first, or be fast. This can be accomplished in different ways. Tailwind paired with heavy hitters like Eruption Typhlosion or Make It Rain Goldengo is the most basic form of hyper offense, using Pokemon with choice items and comboing with generational mechanics like Terra, Dynamax, or Z-moves are another way they can crank the damage to 100 early in a match. Another example from Scarlet and Violet is Priority Spam, with Pokemon like Terra Normal, Extreme Speed Dragonite, and Qianpao that hit super hard with the Sword of Ruin ability. and they can bypass needing to be fast due to the priority moves they use. Although they may not be the fastest, they're still moving first, which accomplishes the same game plan. Stacking damage modifiers like the aforementioned Sword of Ruin or Beads of Ruin, comboed with Stab and offensive Terra type, damage boosting items, weather, moves like Helping Hand, is the type of hyper offense that can blow through opponents that resist their attacks. Subtypes of hyper offense include Tailwind offense, damage modifier stacking, priority spam, and fast psi spam. The strengths of hyper offense teams is that they can end games quickly and run through teams with middling defenses like many balance, stall, and setup archetypes. They also generally have strong speed control to move first, so they have immediate pressure that they can snowball. The weaknesses of hyper offense teams is when they come across things they cannot quickly KO. Many hyper offense Pokemon are very frail, so if they're unable to get a knockout due to things like disruption or just crazy high defenses, they'll be easily KO'd in return. Also, if they end up being the ones moving last, be it due to stronger speed control, faster Pokemon, or Trick Room, again, they're easily knocked out, so they'll have a hard time against things like Trick Room. Speaking of that, Trick Room is our next archetype. Many hyper offense players hate Trick Room because it takes their speed away. But Trick Room and Hyper Offense are really not so different. The game plan of Trick Room is to set Trick Room, then use slow Pokemon to move first and pick up KOs. It's kind of just Hyper Offense with extra steps. A Trick Room team of course needs a Trick Room setter, sometimes two, and usually has two Trick Room sweepers to have physical and special damage, or cover types one sweeper may struggle to hit. Trick Room teams also often have support Pokemon to enhance the sweeper's potency to ensure they win before Trick Room expires, or even support the setter to ensure that it goes up in the first place. Pokemon like Hatterene, Indeedee Female, Gallade, and Calyrex double as setters and sweepers, or setters with other forms of support. The subtypes of Trick Room are pretty vast, and it combos quite well with other archetypes to make a flexible team. Things like Sun Room with Torkoal, Tail Room with Tailwind and Trick Room, Psi Spam, or Hard Trick Room with multiple sweepers for different matchups are all viable. The strengths of Trick Room include the fact that many slow Pokemon not only have good offensive stats, but also good defensive stats. Take a Pokemon like Ursaluna. Now it becomes a heavy hitter that is bulky and fast since it's moving first. Imagine if one of your hyper offensive Pokemon like Fluttermane had the defensive stats of Ursaluna. That's essentially what you get in Trick Room. The weaknesses of Trick Room is that it's very reliant on getting Trick Room up. If you can prevent Trick Room from going up, they'll have a rough time since they'll be moving last for the whole game. Another weakness is that even once set up, Trick Room is on a timer, so if you can stall out all turns of Trick Room with smart switches and protects, you could make a comeback after their setter is gone and Trick Room expires. Balance. The game plan of balance teams is to play a slower game while pivoting a lot until they can find the perfect board state to deal a devastating blow. Balanced teams usually have a good amount of disruption to keep their opponent locked down, using moves like Fake Out and Taunt. They often aim to deny the opponent their preferred game plan, then position perfectly to nail down key targets. Balanced teams also often include a wide variety of tools and Pokemon, including speed control, fast Pokemon, bulky Pokemon, and some very heavy hitters. It's a very adaptable archetype. Pokemon like Porygon 2, Entei, and Rotom that have strong bulk and good damage with middling speed, along with pivots like Incineroar and Rillaboom, are commonplace on balanced teams. Additional options like setup Pokemon like Raging Bolt, or very hard hitters like Landorus and Incarnate are also common as a good combo with a disruption. Due to the flexibility of balance, it's hard to specify subtypes. Balance also combos well as a core or mode on a team, increasing its flexibility as a balance mode to help that archetype's bad matchups. The strengths of balance lies in its flexibility. Since the game plan doesn't rely on any specific move or effect, it can excel against many different opponents when played correctly against them. The weaknesses of balance is that it doesn't excel really hard in any one area, so if they're unable to disrupt a specific strategy, they can be overrun. Hyper offense, for example, can overwhelm balance out the gate. Bulky offense. The game plan of bulky offense is still an offensive game plan. Like hyper offense, they like to take one-hit knockouts and love to use the type chart in their favor. The difference is, instead of moving first, they would rather tank a hit and return with a one-hit knockout. Pokemon like Iron Hands and Metagross are at home with bulky offense. This archetype has a lot of Pokemon that are also quite good on balanced teams, but the difference can often be in the EV spreads and having more tools like screens or damage enhancers over tools like speed control and disruption. Subtypes of bulky offense can lead towards Tailwind support or Trick Room support or Super Bulk with damage mitigation. The first two allow your bulky Pokemon to move first sometimes, creating a bulky and fast threat, while damage mitigation just makes some of your bulky Pokemon virtually unkillable. The strengths mainly lie in the stats of the Pokemon. very bulky, they can often take multiple hits before going down, and trade favorably when they do go down. Sometimes they can wall out specific threats in an endgame, and it's just over from there. Their weakness is that they are slow to begin with, and even with speed control, they still might be slower than fast threats. And they're often still faster than Trick Room threats, so they're moving last in most matchups. This can mean they get doubled up and can be taken out before attacking. Setup. The gameplay of setup teams is to have one Pokemon use setup moves like Nasty Plot, Dragon Dance, or Quiver Dance to enhance their damage. Then use the rest of the team to support that one Pokemon and allow it to blow through the opponent's team all by itself. The most common form of this is using a redirector to allow a partner to set up safely. The types of setup can differ. The aforementioned Nasty Plot on a Pokemon like Goldengo can be devastating, while Quiver Dance on a Volcarona is also very difficult to deal with. Single target attackers like Swords Dance King Gambit can also be used to great effect. Other partners like damage mitigators and disruptors can use things like screens, intimidate, or fake out to keep the setup Pokemon alive, or allow it to set up more. The subtypes of setup include redirecting setup, as mentioned with a redirector and a setup mon, and self-setup. This involves things like beat up into Annihilate or a justified user, or using moves like coaching and decorate, where one of your Pokemon literally spends its turn setting his partner up. The strengths of this archetype is that once set up, the game can often be guaranteed. There's little counterplay when your opponent always outspeeds you and always KOs you with huge stat boosts. The weaknesses of this archetype is that sometimes getting set up can be difficult. Spread moves cannot be redirected, so if your opponent has those, your redirection might not be great. And if your setup Pokemon gets damaged early, their effectiveness can be reduced by chip damage or priority attacks. Our last archetype is Stall. The Stall archetype's game plan is to weather the storm, as it were, by eating attacks while either whittling down the opponent with residual damage or continuously recovering their own HP. These teams include Pokemon that are very bulky and have access to residual damage, HP recovery, trapping moves or abilities like Sand Tomb and Shadow Tag, as well as good defensive synergy to switch around while your opponent attempts to get a good hit in. Also, defensive setup is common, or Pokemon that can reduce your opponent's offenses are seen on this archetype. Guaranteed damage moves like Seismic Toss are also common. The subtypes of Stall are Residual Damage Stall and Timer Stall. Residual damage uses things like Sand Chip, Poison Damage, Leech Seed, Infestation, or the like to just whittle down your opponent over time. Timer Stall often abuses moves like Minimize and Constant Recovery to prevent your opponent from hitting you at all. If you can pick up just one KO before your opponent, you'll win when the timer expires. Lastly, Perish Trap is a form of stall. Since you're often not directly attacking your opponent once it's set up, you're just stalling for that timer to expire instead of the game timer. The strengths of stall come when your opponent does not have an answer to whatever form of stall you have. It can sometimes be a one matchup before the game even begins. Unironically, you also have the mental game on your side. Playing against stall can be very frustrating, and winning your first match in a best of 3 can tilt your opponent, giving you an edge for the rest of the set. However, the weaknesses of stall stem from the same aspect. If your opponent does have answers to your form of stall, it can sometimes be a lost matchup out the gate. Stall also takes multiple turns to get set up, so you can sometimes be overrun before your stall has come to fruition. Due to the fast pace of VGC, stall is usually one of the worst performing archetypes. Of course, this video doesn't cover all subtypes of all the different archetypes, but hopefully this gave you a good idea of something you might want to play or play against. Stay tuned for the next video about cores and modes, and the one after that will use everything we've talked about in team building to actually start team building. Thanks for watching.